Over the last year, I've talked a lot about how Frieren has a remarkable way of both embracing and subverting tropes. And in thinking about that recently, I noticed just how engaging a good surprise can be. I also came to the conclusion that there's an important distinction between surprise and shock. I think when a story has twists, it showcases this. People can often immediately name examples of media, directors, and stories that are defined by their twists, shocking the audience with a sudden realization that recontextualizes a lot of what's been going on. But sometimes surprises are subtle. They don't hit you over the head with a big, grand realization. Because while twists are easy to see and define, I think surprises are just as important and a lot harder to recognize. Welcome to a running series called Exploring Frieren. My name is Pei, and today we're exploring how a show can be so surprising, but rarely shocking. This entire video feels like it's focusing on something that's really hard to define, so the argument is absolutely semantic. I'm using words like shock and surprise to mean different things when it's just as reasonable to interpret them as interchangeable. But this distinction is important for today's video, because when I'm differentiating between the two, I'm placing shock as a subcategory of surprise. Like not all fruit are apples, but all apples are fruit. But the question still lies in why I think this distinction is so important. Twists or shocking turns of event in stories feel drastically different than the thing I'm trying to highlight, but they're built off of the same foundation, engaging the audience through unexpected writing decisions. So to understand this better, let's start by looking at the audience as a collective. Obviously, anyone that's reading a book or watching a show is having an individual relationship with it. But creators often lump all those people into a larger collective, an individual thing. It's really hard for me to see the statistic of how many people watch my videos each month and think of them as individuals. I can't conceptualize it, it's too many people with too many varying perspectives. So instead, I look at general trends. What is the reception across hundreds of thousands of people? This is where tropes come into play. A narrative device used across multiple stories that audiences start to recognize as recurring. The interesting thing about tropes is ultimately I think they're determined by the viewer and what media they've consumed in the past. But creators have to work off of a more broad landscape. What tropes have been overused? What will people recognize? And how can a writer use that to their advantage? Some probably immediately come to mind when it comes to storytelling, but YouTube videos offer a really obvious example. YouTube is full of many different tropes. Have you noticed that thing I do where I say, my name is Pei, and today we're talking about blah blah blah, that I put at the front of every one of my videos? I do that for very specific reasons. I don't really put my face in many videos, and the subject is always a different anime people already care about, so there's not really much for people to attach onto when it comes to my channel as a brand. I add that little producer tag so when people stumble across my videos 3-4 times, they start to realize, oh, I keep coming back to this one guy's arguments. If you look at a lot of successful video essayists, they tend to include some sort of intro, a tag that makes their content more recognizable for recurring viewers.
Hi, my name is Tony, and this is Every Frame a Painting.
Now, a more common trope that all of you will recognize is all the different strategies people have used for engagement. They're often referred to as calls to action, asking people to subscribe, like, or comment. There have been whole metas to it, where people adopt different strategies that become widely popular. For example, pointing towards what percentage of viewers are subscribed to a channel that are consuming the content. As far as I know, that was popularized by the Minecraft YouTuber Dream, and then everyone started to adopt it. I tend to lean towards less calls to action, but I do it too. And the reason so many people do it is because most of the time it works. There's huge statistical differences between an effective call to action and a video without one, but they also wear out quick. As soon as a call to action becomes a cliche, suddenly it'll hurt more than it helps, disrupting the flow of a video and inclining people to do the opposite of what a creator's asking. So the way it tends to work is a creator comes up with an effective strategy, other people start to emulate it, it is over-adopted, oversaturated, and then eventually becomes a cliche. This is also true of other forms of media, like storytelling. There's kind of an inherent paradox to telling stories because there are so many norms, structures, and tropes that are used regularly. But that has to be balanced with not being too predictable. If stories are too predictable, it often gets in the way of engagement and immersion. Emotional beats will fall flat. But if you break away too much from standard storytelling structure, it actually alienates audiences. It's harder to follow what's going on. Audiences at large have been trained to have expectations about the general flow of a story, and stories that are too non-conforming generally won't do well on a wide scale. It's a weird and really interesting part of storytelling, because stories are often influenced by the environment they're released into, like this weird meta fourth wall thing. Now, sometimes good writers will factor in that context, using tropes to subvert the audience's expectations, because something I've noticed in all of my favorite pieces of media lately is that they consistently surprise me, finding new, interesting, fresh ways to explore an already comfortable structure. Frieren on paper is an incredibly cut and dry fantasy story, and I really don't like that style of world building. I kind of have an inherent bias against it. And part of what I think makes Frieren so special is the way they use those tropes to make the entire story more interesting. Frieren in its origin was initially created to be a gag comedy. I think this is a big reason as to why trope is such a major component of the story. In my brain, that idea feels reminiscent of things like Konosuba or One Punch Man, satire utilizing tropes for the sake of comedy. Now, I still think Frieren is a very funny show, but I also think it uses tropes in a way that feel emotionally significant too. I think this is a major component of why the story is so consistently surprising. There's a self-awareness that it uses time and time again, leading to decisions that consistently catch me off guard. I think the more you analyze media and look closely, the more predictable it starts to become. Kind of like being able to predict a rhyme at the end of a verse in a song you've never listened to before because of context clues. And I've noticed recently that I really value stories that consistently surprise me. And this is where the difference between surprise and shock really comes in. Take for example a theoretical horror movie where a character's walking down a dark hall. You can know that something shocking is going to happen, a jump scare or a reveal, and not be surprised at all. Another good example is how M. Night Shyamalan has kind of written himself into a corner. Every movie he makes, there's an expectation that there'll be a twist at the end. But when you know a twist is coming, you're less surprised by it, which undermines its effectiveness. Being shocked and surprised are not the same thing. They can overlap, but they don't have to. My favorite stories recently are ones that consistently surprise me. There's this fiction series I've been reading lately called Dungeon Crawler Carl that I think is outstanding. It really engages in this in a way that feels very reminiscent of what I love about Frieren. It's such a powerful tool, and it doesn't have to be big or grandiose. These decisions don't have to come as shocks, and I almost think they're more sustainably used when they don't. So when in Frieren do I think that this is used most effectively? Let's take a look. Here's a quick spoiler warning for anyone that needs it for Season 1 of Frieren Beyond Journey's End. The first example that comes to mind is Sein as a character. There's this classic structure that we've seen time and time again, especially in shonen, where a party slowly adopts new members. Having a character fit in neatly with an ensemble that the audience loves is very difficult, and it's especially impressive when they shift an already interesting dynamic to make it even better. I really believe Sein is an outstanding character, and for me, everything in my gut indicated that he'd stay with the party after his introduction. In Frieren's original party, there was a warrior, mage, priest, and hero. So when Sein was introduced, he filled the obvious missing role in having a priest. It also created this possibility where Frieren could step into that role as a hero. I don't know, that's interesting. The whole story is built around running parallels between the old party and new one. It's a brave decision to let go of a character that was working so well. It surprised me, but it felt beautifully in line with both the character and themes of the story. It was a decision I never expected, but also wouldn't change in retrospect. Another surprise comes in the way Frieren navigates Fern and Stark's budding romance. Romances often take a lot of space in a story, but with rare exception, Fern and Stark's developing relationship falls to the background. Even when they're given big moments, more often than not, it's multifaceted, serving some purposes outside of just their dynamic. There's generally an expectation that if romance is going to be introduced between important characters, it's something that's going to be delved into. And in the future, it probably will continue to develop, but they're taking their time in a way that really works. It's not at all how I'd expect a slice of life or fantasy adventure to treat romance. To me, it feels kind of singular. I can't think of another story that does a budding relationship in the same way. In the exact opposite direction of love and romance, or maybe full circle, is the action in Frieren. Especially in the first half of the season, this show occasionally dips into extreme action for just a brief moment. Anime, especially old shonens, have a tendency to really draw out conflict. It's so common for fights to span many episodes, but some of the best fight sequences in Frieren are so brief. Another surprise comes in rewatching Frieren and realizing some of my favorite little stories are only half of an episode. I've made whole videos praising Frieren's ability to tell entire stories in only a couple minutes. And when I finally got used to that, they changed it up, creating a mage exam, taking a leap of faith to tell the story in a different way. And it ended up being so crucial, developing some of my favorite characters in the first season. Denki had so much more substance and significance than I originally expected. All of these little surprises I probably could make an entire video about if I haven't already. And kind of the point of this video is I wouldn't really classify any of these as shocking. They're not twists, they're just unexpected directions that hold up under scrutiny. They don't undermine any of the setup, they don't act in opposition to what I would expect from a character, and they're still super satisfying, almost more so. I think this is an exceptionally difficult thing to do in storytelling. Recently, I've been working on my own writing, and seeing this is almost discouraging because no matter what I do, I'm kinda gonna be bad. Analyzing media and creating it require different skill sets that do inform one another but aren't one-to-one. So as I'm analyzing stories that I think are really well written, I'm noticing just how engaging they are, and I'm admiring how difficult it is to do that as effectively as they have. It's very hard to do this. To me, it's a sign of expertise or coincidence. When a story does it time and time again, it seems like chance isn't a major component at play. That's why I find this entire concept of surprising without being shocking so interesting. Because as easy as it is to get caught up analyzing any piece of media, sometimes they come along and are just engaging.